A little girl with cancer had one wish to meet a royal guard. After 15 years of unwavering service, no one expected him to break protocol. But when he did, what followed left the entire crowd in tears. Here's what happened. But before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow, at the same time, we'll bring you another story of courage and discipline from the royal guards that you won't want to miss. The morning sun cast a gentle glow over the courtyard of Buckingham Palace, warming the cobblestones and setting the golden trim of the guard's uniform alight. For Lieutenant James Harrison, this was a familiar post, one he had stood at for over 15 years. With a crisp red tunic, polished boots, and medals earned from 2 tours in Afghanistan, Harrison was not just a ceremonial figure. He was a soldier's soldier. Behind the stillness of his stance was a man who had seen war, who had carried comrades to safety, and who had endured both the battlefield and the long, silent hours of royal duty. That day began like any other, with tourists gathering for photos and curious glances. But what Harrison could not have known was that this would be no ordinary shift. Something was about to test not his physical discipline, but the deeper strength of his character. He stood tall and motionless, just as tradition required. Yet behind the discipline and decorum, there beat a heart still capable of deep feeling. From across the courtyard, a family approached, a father, a mother, and a little girl, whose presence would stir something within the seasoned guard that not even war had touched. Among the usual bustle of tourists, one family stood out, not because they were loud or flashy, but because of the quiet care with which they moved. A father and mother walked gently on either side of a little girl, no older than 7. Her steps were small, but determined, and though her face was pale, her eyes sparkled with a kind of joy that can only come from a dream, about to be fulfilled. She wore a pink dress, neatly pressed for the occasion, and a knitted beanie pulled down over her head where no hair peeked out. Her name was Emily, and she was battling stage 4 cancer. This visit to Buckingham Palace was more than a sightseeing trip. It was a long-held wish, a dream spoken in hospital rooms and whispered in bedtime prayers, to see a royal guard, up close, just once. Her parents supported her carefully, their hands never far from her shoulders. They looked on with pride and heartbreak in equal measure. As they made their way through the crowd, people around them began to notice. Conversations hushed, cameras lowered. Some moved aside instinctively, creating a quiet space around the family. Emily's delight was pure and contagious. She pointed excitedly toward Guard Harrison. "Mommy, look! He's so tall, and his uniform is so red." Her voice, though fragile, carried with the clarity only children possess. Her father gently reminded her to stay back, to respect the guard's duty, but Emily already knew. She had studied this moment, watched videos, and read books. She understood the rules, and she also understood what it meant to be brave. This was more than a visit for Emily. It was a milestone, and though her body was weakened, her spirit stood tall. As Emily and her parents slowly made their way through the crowd, something remarkable began to happen. Tourists who had just moments earlier been chatting, laughing, or snapping pictures began to take notice of the small, determined child walking with such quiet courage. Conversations softened. Footsteps slowed. People instinctively stepped aside, creating a respectful path for the family. A young mother was heard quietly explaining to her daughter that some children fight very hard battles. An elderly couple, near the front, dabbed their eyes, moved by the sight of this little girl, whose excitement shone brighter than the morning sun. Even those who had never seen illness up close could sense it. There was something sacred in the air, something unspoken, that reached beyond the brick and stone of Buckingham Palace. Emily wasn't there for a spectacle. She wasn't looking to disrupt or demand attention. She came with reverence in her heart and a dream she had held on to through painful treatments and long hospital stays. That dream, now unfolding, touched everyone who saw it. Parents in the crowd began to draw their own children closer, some whispering gentle lessons about kindness and empathy. Cameras were lowered, not because the moment wasn't worth capturing, but because people seemed to understand. This wasn't a moment to record, it was one to feel. Some visitors smiled through tears. Others stood in silence, hands over their hearts. What had begun as a routine morning at the palace had transformed into something far more meaningful. Lieutenant James Harrison had stood motionless for thousands of hours throughout his 15-year service. Rain, wind, blistering sun, he had withstood them all without flinching. He had endured jeers from unruly tourists, flashes from intrusive cameras, and even the weight of memories from his time on the battlefield. But as he watched little Emily, trying with all her strength to stand straight like a soldier, despite her trembling body and fading breath, something stirred deep within him. For the first time in his career, he felt a pull stronger than protocol, and so, against every rule drilled into him, through years of training, Harrison moved, his boots turned with precise grace, facing the child directly. A hush fell over the crowd. Gasps rippled through the courtyard as the seemingly immovable guard took a knee, lowering himself to Emily's level. Her wide eyes blinked in astonishment, then filled with wonder. With deliberate care, he removed one of his medals, earned through service in Afghanistan, and presented it to her. "This," he said with solemn clarity, "is for exceptional bravery in the face of difficult conditions, and I believe you've more than earned it." Tears welled in the eyes of her parents. Strangers wept openly. Harrison pinned the medal gently onto her pink dress and saluted her as he would a fellow soldier. That act of compassion, simple yet profound, broke every ceremonial rule, and in doing so created a moment that would be remembered far beyond the palace gates. In that instant, Harrison wasn't just a guard upholding centuries of tradition. He was a man honoring the purest form of courage. And in breaking his stillness, he moved an entire crowd to tears. After pinning the medal to Emily's dress, Guard Harrison did something no one in the courtyard expected. Still on one knee, his voice calm yet steady, he asked the little girl, "Would you like to learn the official salute?" Emily's eyes lit up with excitement, her small hand trembling slightly as she raised it, eager to mirror his instruction. With patience and care, Harrison guided her through the movement. Though her body was weakened, her concentration never wavered. When she finally completed the salute, a gesture as precise as it was heartfelt, a spontaneous round of applause rose from the crowd. Some clapped through tears. Others simply held their hands to their hearts. But Harrison wasn't done. With his arms gently opened, he posed a final question. "Would you do me the honor?" Emily, without hesitation, stepped forward and embraced him. Her tiny arms reached only partway around his uniformed frame, but the power of that hug moved everyone watching. In that instant, they were no longer just a soldier and a sick child. They were two warriors, one in uniform, one in pink, bound by mutual courage and quiet understanding. When the embrace ended, Harrison stood tall once more. He offered Emily a formal military salute, not the kind reserved for tourists, but the kind given to fellow soldiers and dignitaries. It was a sign of utmost respect. Emily, beaming despite her fatigue, returned the salute one last time. All around them, the atmosphere had changed. What had begun as a simple visit became a sacred moment. strangers became witnesses to an act of humanity so profound that even the guards behind the palace gates seemed to stand a little straighter. It was a memory etched not just in phones or photographs, but in hearts. As Guard Harrison resumed his post, the courtyard remained silent, changed. Though his posture returned to ceremonial form, those who had witnessed the moment could feel it. Something was different. He now stood, not just as a symbol of tradition and duty, but as a reminder of what truly matters: compassion, courage, and the quiet power of the human spirit. For Emily and her family, that morning became a treasured memory, a moment of light in a time of struggle. But its meaning reached far beyond them. Tourists respectfully stepped aside as the family passed, many offering gentle smiles or words of encouragement. Some simply reached out to touch Emily's shoulder or admire the medal now proudly pinned to her dress. Her steps were slow, but her head was high. What Harrison did wasn't about breaking rules. It was about honoring something greater. In one deliberate act, he showed the world that protocol should never overshadow compassion. He reminded everyone watching, young and old, that the truest form of duty lies not only in ceremony, but in humanity. In standing still for 15 years, Harrison had proven discipline, but in the moment he chose to move, he showed something even rarer: heart. What happened that morning at Buckingham Palace was more than a touching exchange. It became a lesson in what true strength looks like. In a world often overwhelmed by noise, confrontation, and pride, Lieutenant James Harrison showed that real leadership doesn't need volume to make an impact. His quiet, measured act, kneeling before a little girl and recognizing her bravery, spoke more powerfully than any command ever could. For many older Canadians, it was a moment that reaffirmed values they've held close all their lives: humility, honor, restraint, and service rooted in compassion. This story wasn't about breaking tradition, but elevating it, proving that sometimes the most sacred duty is to recognize humanity in others. It's a message worth passing down to grandchildren and future generations, that dignity is not found in uniforms or titles, but in the way we treat others when no one is watching. Harrison reminded us that we don't have to raise our voices to be heard, and that sometimes the most lasting impact comes from standing tall, not in pride, but in empathy. In that single moment, witnessed by strangers from around the world, we were all reminded the greatest guardians don't just protect palaces, they protect the values that hold us together.